Hello everyone, my name is Xu Ting. I'm a first year MA student. My concentration is international political economy. Today I'm going to talk about the 2008 financial crisis, government's reaction, and what we can learn. So why do we have to talk about financial crisis? Well, when the financial crisis happened, it actually made impacts in every person's life. And since we're science students, we're studying international relations, we're studying international economics, there's not a way to avoid this topic. We might meet this topic in every field. So, yeah, so I'm gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna talk about three things: what happened during the crisis, how did the government react, and what we can really learn from this experience. So, what happened during the financial crisis? Well, during the 2008, first it was Lehman Brothers who went bankrupt. And this led to so many crises of banks that they all met the same problem, that they may go bankrupt. And Merrill Lynch, which was acquired by the Bank of America, it also met several financial crises. And there was also lots of rumors about Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all those top investment banks, that they all met same situation. And most importantly, there was massive panic among all the people, among the markets, among the companies, the investors, the public, and like every person who was involved in financial world, in the business world. So, what were the underlying causes of the crisis? Well, firstly, it was because the nature of financial markets. We all know that financial market is really vulnerable. It's opaque, it's intangible, and it's related to thousands of financial transactions, high volumes of deals. That really makes it hard for regulators to exert effective and efficient regulation. So, what the shadow financial system means here is that during the 2008, it's not working.
Yeah, it is.
Oh, it's working. Okay. The shadow financial system means that there's not only traditional commercial bank inside the markets, there's also like investment banks, hedge funds, mutual funds, pension funds, and some non-bank financial corporations such as GE Capital, Bain Capital. All those finance-related institutions are involved in the financial markets, and they might all receive really harmful impacts from those crises. And the securitization means our financial derivatives. The banks like to sell their illiquid assets to a military, and a military will sell those products to investors. Those products are highly risky. So the banks are actually transferring their risk to investors. For example, those through pension funds to the investors who are like individual investors or some company investors. And because the Wall Street, they're not public policymaker, they might be less concerned about like the long-term benefits for the whole public. They're more focused on the short-term profits. We have to admit that, right? And also, there are several important underlying causes that came from the regulatory failure. Because we all know that free market is a good thing. We should just leave the market to regulate itself. But does it really work? And also, the government was so inactive before 2008 because it did not have enough oversight, supervision over the investment banks, which are really risky, and also over the portfolios, and it just allowed those banks to have really high leverage ratio. So what the banks do was to like borrow money and then to make money. So they all want to borrow so much money to make more profits, make more money. So they all have high leverage ratio, which was really risky. And also, the government did not pay much attention to the shadow financial system. The last crisis, the last underlying cause here, too big to fail, means all those banks who are systematically significant banks that they have so much impact in the market. Once they made crisis, the government will try its best to save those banks, to stop them from failing, so that it's. Oh, what? Okay, so yeah, so actually this will cause more hazard for those big investment banks to take even more risky, to take even more risk. And let's move on to the second thing. So what did the government do? Well, first of all, we have to realize during such crisis, there's no third party, despite the government, can provide the financial capability and the moral authority to provide those large of liquid to the market, to provide safety net for those banks, commercial and investment banks, and most importantly, to reestablish confidence among all investors, among customers, among companies, among public. So the government's short-term policy objective is to first stabilize the banking system, stabilize the financial market, and second, send signals to all the investors that the financial market is going to recover. Its primary tool is to inject massive amounts of liquidity into the banks and bail out those systematically important banks to stop them from breaking apart. Here are some examples what the U.S. government really did during the 2008 financial crisis. First, it injected massive amounts of liquidity. For example, repurchase agreement is kind of a financial tool for the central government to inject large amount of liquidity into the banks. And also, it nationalized AIG, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mae, because those financial institutions also met so many financial crises, and the government inject large liquidity into their equity in order to nationalize those institutions. The government also provided $3.4 trillion for discount window. The discount window means that those banks can borrow this large amount of money during a very short period, usually overnight, with really low interest rate. And the fourth one is to injected $7 billion to improve the balance sheets of the 9 largest banks: Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, Citi. You all know that, right? And the fifth one is to conducted currency swaps with foreign central banks. The last one is to make Goldman Sachs and Morgan Stanley into bank holding companies. So these 2 banks, who are investment banks, they can also get access to the discount window and the safety net provided by the central government. Sorry. Yeah. So let's move to the last thing. So about government's reaction, there's some critics. So is it proper to sacrifice Main Street to save Wall Street? And do we really need to bail out all those important banks every time when crisis come? And why can't we have some too big to fail banks that really have large size and they really have important effects in the whole financial system? And what about inflation? We injected so large amounts of liquidity into the markets. How can we deal with the inflation? Well, these are all questions, but let's think, if the government had not intervened, what would happen? Well, the U.S. economy might go down, and the whole financial system might not recover. And this will relate to all other countries. We might all get serious impacts from this financial crisis. So even though the U.S. government their regulation, their solution might not be perfect, but it is essential because it actually did save the U.S. economy. U.S. economy is in a great recovery. Just see the U.S. economy now. So we really have to not be too demanding for the government. We have to admit that U.S. government did its job, but maybe we can think of a better way to deal with financial crisis in the future. So these are my presentations, and I'm happy to answer any question. Thank you.
So what do you think the Chinese central banker can learn from this crisis?
Well, there's always a problem that some governments have too much regulation, and some governments have less regulations. I think Chinese government is on the side of exerting too much regulation. For example, during last year's Chinese stock market crash, it was because Chinese government intervened a little too much in the stock markets. And although it still tried to get the whole stock markets recover, it still showed that maybe give more freedom to the Chinese markets. Yeah, this is what I think.
Yes, you mentioned the risk of inflation.
Yeah.
But in fact, the Japanese government has been implementing a similar policy, quantitative easement for nearly 20 years. But there is no inflation, but we have deflation. So, do you think the quantitative theory is now still effective?
You mean the quantitative easing?
Yeah. According to the quantitative theory of money, if the government increases the money supply, there should be inflation. But we didn't have any inflation.
I'll describe this in two ways. First, theory is always in the book. What really happens in the world is what we can really learn. And since Japanese markets now has negative interest rate, right, almost near zero interest rate, I think so to deal with the Japanese market, maybe it's not really reasonable to just look at the theory. And the second thing, I think this is for the U.S. markets, because U.S. markets is different from Japanese markets. U.S. markets still have much growth factor to drive the economy to recover and to continue growing. But for Japanese markets, there might be, I'm not very familiar with Japanese markets, but I know that there's some the labor, the aging society and something with the labor. So there might be less factors to drive the economy to continue to grow. I guess maybe this might be one of the reasons, but yeah, I'm open to more discussions. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.